The sky was screaming above the forest, crackling with strange blue clouds, as something tore through the atmosphere, leaving a blazing trail behind it. The animals of the jungle scattered, the trees bent under the shockwave, and then silence fell, as a small, sleek escape pod crashed into the damp, mossy ground, sending dirt and broken branches flying in every direction from inside the pod. A soft whimper was heard, followed by a flickering blue light, and then the hatch opened slowly, steam hissing as a small figure tumbled out. Her skin was glowing faintly lavender, her long silver hair tangled with debris, her eyes wide and filled with pain and confusion. She was young, barely more than a child, and very clearly not from this planet. Her name was Aya, and she was a member of the Ayari race, known throughout the galaxy for their advanced minds, their delicate beauty, and their refusal to engage in violence. Aya looked around the dense green jungle. She was breathing heavily, clutching her side where blood was beginning to show through her shimmering suit. She tried to stand, but her leg gave out and she fell again, crying out in pain. Far above her, orbiting ships belonging to several alien races watched silently. The Ayari girl had been abandoned during a surprise pirate raid. Her family, her crew, her people had fled, leaving her to die on a planet marked as a Class 5 danger zone, and the reason it was considered dangerous was simple. Humans were there, the so-called carnivorous humans, loud, unpredictable, emotionally unstable, and most of all meat-eaters. To many races in the galaxy, humans were whispered about as monsters, creatures of war who devoured anything in their path. Aya knew these stories, and fear coiled tightly in her chest, but the pain in her leg was growing. Her vision was starting to blur. She did not have a choice. With trembling fingers, she activated the emergency beacon on her wrist. It was a weak signal, but it would reach someone. Anyone, please help, she whispered as she slipped into unconsciousness. Not far away, deep within the same jungle, a small human scouting unit received the distress signal. Their leader, a tall, weathered man named John, turned his head as the message crackled through their old comm system. Another signal, boss. Again, out of nowhere, one of the soldiers said. John frowned. The last time they answered a beacon, it was a trap, but he nodded, and they moved out silently. Within 30 minutes, they found the crash site, and their weapons were drawn. At first they thought it was another malfunctioning drone, until they saw the small figure curled near the pod, unconscious, bleeding, and clearly in pain. John lowered his weapon first, slowly stepping forward and scanning her vitals. She is still alive, he said, but just barely. Get the medkit now. The team worked fast, carefully lifting her onto a portable stretcher and treating the wound on her leg. Her suit reacted defensively, at first sending out small sparks, but then quieted down once it registered the help was not hostile. Eyes stirred weakly, eyes fluttering open, and the first thing she saw was a human face, rough-bearded and scarred, looking down at her. With concern, she gasped, jerking back. She was going to be eaten. She was sure of it, but John only said softly, "Easy, you are safe now, we got you." She did not understand the words, but the tone was calm, reassuring. She looked around at the others, their bulky gear, their fierce faces, and felt her heart pounding. Humans. They were humans, and they were not hurting her. Instead, they were carrying her away from the crash, gently covering her with a blanket, checking her breathing, treating her like something fragile and important. From the trees, a small spy drone belonging to a different alien race zoomed away, carrying the footage of what had just happened. The watchers aboard their ship scoffed. Look at the humans, pretending to be kind fools. She will be cooked by sunset, just wait. But down in the jungle, the humans reached their camp and laid Aya on a bed of soft fabric. They set up lights, heaters, even tried to cook food that would not upset her stomach. John sat by her side, watching over her like a silent guardian, and Aya, confused and terrified, stared at the fire, wondering why the monsters in the stories were treating her better than her own people ever had. The jungle whispered around them, the stars above twinkled in silence, and the girl from the sky rested among the so-called beasts, not knowing that her entire world was about to change forever. Aya opened her eyes slowly, and the first thing she felt was warmth, not the cold steel of alien med bays, not the soft sterile air of Ayari ships, but real warmth from something burning slowly nearby. It took her several breaths to realize it was a fire, real fire, controlled and calm, dancing in the middle of the camp. Around her, she saw the humans moving silently. They looked nothing like the stories, tall, strong, armored like walking mountains. Some had marks on their faces, some had wild hair, some wore strange fabrics over their bodies, and yet none of them looked at her with hunger or cruelty. Instead, their eyes held something else, something she could not yet name. One of the humans walked toward her. He had dark skin, a square jaw, and eyes that seemed to glow with a strange kindness. He knelt beside her, offering a container with liquid. Aya flinched, pulling back, her hands trembling. She remembered the warnings, the tales of boiling and roasting, of sharp teeth and louder laughs. The man said something in their language, then placed the drink beside her without force or threat. He smiled a little, then walked away, giving her space. Confused and weak, Aya reached for the container, sniffed it cautiously, and took a sip. It was warm, sweet. Not poison, not flesh, something made from fruit. Maybe it calmed her chest, eased her dry throat. She drank slowly, watching as the humans continued their strange rituals. They were cooking food that smelled strange, but not terrible. One of them was playing a soft rhythm on a box that made musical sounds. Another was repairing gear, but kept glancing at her as if checking she was still okay. In her world, the Ayari would never sit in dirt, never make music in open air, never show care to a stranger like this. They were beings of mind and elegance, not emotion. Yet here she was wrapped in a rough but soft blanket, warmed by fire, surrounded by those she once feared. I touched her side and found it bandaged. The pain had dulled. Someone had cleaned her wound, covered her skin, and even replaced the torn part of her suit. She did not know how to understand this kindness, especially from humans. The stories said they were selfish, loud, greedy, hungry creatures who would sell even their own blood for power. She had always believed that, until now. The tall man returned again. He sat a little distance away, his weapon beside him. He did not speak this time, just nodded at her, then looked at the fire. Aya watched him. His face was tired, older than the others, and marked with things she did not understand. Maybe battle, maybe loss. She hesitated, then reached out with her mind. A small skin, nothing deep, just enough to sense his emotion. She expected rage, hunger, cruelty. Instead she felt something heavy like stone, layered with sorrow, courage, patience, and a deep sense of duty. The feeling startled her. She pulled back quickly, blinking at him. He did not move. Perhaps he did not even notice her skin. She lay back slowly, her mind spinning. Who were these humans really? And why had they come to help her when her own people had left her to die? Hours passed, maybe more, as the sky darkened and strange lights blinked above the trees. Night on this world was louder, full of calls and rustling. Aya sat up as much as her injury allowed. One of the younger humans approached with another container. This one had food inside, soft steamed roots and something that smelled of herbs. Aya hesitated, then took it with a nod. The young soldier smiled and said something she did not understand, but his tone was cheerful, kind again, no threat, no mockery. As she ate the food slowly, feeling strength return, she realized something. These humans were not pretending. This was not a trap. This was who they were. At least these ones, gentle, strong, and fiercely loyal to each other and to her for no reason she could see. As the stars moved above them, Aya watched John, the leader, clean his weapon, then help another soldier adjust a wound dressing. She saw how they laughed quietly, how they supported the weakest in their group, how they shared their food without question. She saw no command, no cruelty, only cooperation, the opposite of what she had always believed. Her chest felt tight, her mind unsure. The fire cracked, the wind blew through the trees, and for the first time since crashing, Aya felt something close to safe. Not home, not yet, but something close. And in that moment, as she looked at the so-called monsters surrounding her, she began to wonder if the real monsters were the ones who had left her behind, not the ones who had found her bleeding, broken, and afraid, and carried her through the jungle without asking anything in return. She closed her eyes and listened to their voices, strange words, soft laughter, and the quiet beat of human hearts, and she knew deep inside everything was about to change forever. The morning came. Without warning, the jungle roared to life as strange words called from the treetops and unseen creatures moved through thick underbrush. Aya opened her eyes to the light filtering through the trees. Her body ached, but less than before. Her wound was healing, and she could sit up fully now, wrapped in the thick human blanket. She watched as the group prepared to move. The humans were fast and methodical, rolling up tents, packing gear, checking weapons. They moved like they had done this many times before, but despite the urgency, they never once pushed or ignored her. They brought her water, helped her stand, even carried her gently on a stretcher. When walking became too painful, John, the leader, walked beside her, most of the time quiet, but always alert. He seemed to sense things before they happened. When the wind changed direction, when birds suddenly flew away, when the jungle turned quiet, he would raise his fist, and the group would halt, all eyes on him, waiting without complaint. Aya watched all this with growing confusion and awe. How could creatures so feared be so disciplined, so loyal to each other? She had expected chaos, expected anger, but found something else entirely. As they moved deeper into the forest, a strange heat began to rise, not just the natural warmth of the sun, but something dry and crackling. And soon John stopped mid-step, his eyes narrowing. The air smelled different. Aya noticed it, to something sharp and bitter, like burning leaves. The next moment, the trees ahead burst into flame. A wave of fire rolled through the jungle, feeding on dry wood and fallen branches. Thick smoke rose to the sky, turning the air into a choking gray wall. The humans reacted instantly. No panic, no shouting. They pulled Outmasks covered Aya with a heat shield and rerouted their path through a narrow valley. But the fire moved faster than expected, driven by winds that howled like beasts. Aya clung to the stretcher, her body shaking from the heat, her eyes wide with terror. Branches fell, trees cracked under the heat. One of the soldiers stumbled, and flames licked at his boots. John turned around without hesitation and pulled him up, covering him with part of his own fireproof cloak. I saw it happen, watched as the leader risked his own life to save another. Without thinking, without needing praise, the group moved as fast as they could. But the flames closed and Aya felt the heat bite into her skin. Even through the shield, the smoke made it hard to breathe. She coughed weakly, her vision spinning. John reached her side, lifted her into his arms, and ran through the firestorm. The world turned red and gold and black, the roar of the fire louder than anything she had ever heard. Suddenly a tree ahead began to fall. The soldier behind them screamed a warning. John turned his body and shielded Aya with his back. The massive branch slammed into the ground inches from them. Sparks flew into the air, embers clung to his jacket, but he kept moving, never letting her fall. They burst through the flames into a clearing where the fire had not yet reached. The group collapsed, breathing heavily. Aya gasped for air, trembling in John's arms. He set her down gently, brushing soot from her hair, checking her vitals. Even while his own hands were burned and raw, her vision cleared just enough to see his face covered in ash, eyes filled with pain, but still focused on her. In that moment I felt something break deep inside, not fear, not confusion, but a walla. Believe she had carried all her life, a voice that always said humans are dangerous, humans are cruel. That voice was gone now, crushed by the image of a man who ran into fire to save her, who gave no thought to his own life, who now crouched beside her, breathing hard but still watching her like a guardian as the others treated their wounds and set up camp again. I sat silently, her eyes wet, not from smoke, but from something else, something she did not have words for. She reached out slowly and touched John's burned hand, her fingers glowing faintly with blue light. She used a small part of her healing power, just enough to ease the pain. His eyes met hers, and in that shared moment no words were spoken, none were needed. The jungle burned behind them, the sky darkened with ash, but I felt a strange calm growing inside her. For the first time she did not see the humans as others or monsters or myths. She saw them as people, flawed, hurting, but brave and full of something her own race had long forgotten, something she now understood as strength, not in power, but in love and sacrifice and fire and pain. And still standing tall, she lay back against the blanket, listening to the wind, and thought if monsters could feel this much, could bleed this much, then maybe they were never monsters at all. Maybe they were more like her than she had ever known. Night settled around the jungle like a dark ocean, thick and heavy, filled with the scent of ash and earth. The fire had passed, but its mark remained. The trees were black and the air still hot, the ground covered in smoldering leaves. Aya sat near the edge of the temporary camp, her eyes glowing faintly. As she looked into the distance, her body was healing faster now, but it was not her skin that ached, it was her heart, her thoughts. She glanced at John, who was seated a few feet away, sharpening a blade with slow, careful strokes. His hands were still bandaged, his face silent, unreadable. The humans were strange that way, so loud when joking, so quiet when in pain. She could not understand how they bore it all so calmly. She could not understand why it mattered to her so much. Her fingers moved unconsciously over the edge of her sleeve where her Ayari crest was once sewn, a symbol of honor, of lineage, of everything that had once defined her. She felt none of it now, only a sense of emptiness and question swirling inside her like a storm. She had to know the truth. She had to understand them more than what she saw, more than what they showed. So she closed her eyes and reached out again, this time deeper, not just a surface scan, but a careful, slow connection. Her mind touched John's thoughts lightly, not enough to invade, just enough to glimpse, to see, and what she saw made her breath catch fire. Lost, betrayal, memories filled with war, with blood, with broken promises and shattered dreams, but also laughter and music, children playing in fields, hands held tightly under falling rain, voices singing in languages she did not know, hearts breaking and still beating, and above it all something constant, a sense of duty to protect, not to conquer, not to control, but to guard, to carry those weaker, even when it hurt, even when it cost everything. Her mind trembled under the weight of it, and she pulled back, gasping, tears running down her cheeks. She had never felt so much, never seen a being so full of sorrow and hope and strength. She looked at John again, and this time truly saw him, not a soldier, not a monster, not a hero, just a man, broken and still standing, a human. Aya wiped her tears and stood slowly, limping slightly as she walked over to him. He looked up surprised, but said nothing. She knelt in front of him, placed her glowing hands over his, and let the healing flow stronger. This time she poured into him not just energy, But understanding a silent apology for judging him, for fearing him, John did not pull away. He let her hand stay. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. An unspoken truth forged in fire and pain. They were not the same, but they were not so different. Either the other soldiers watched from a distance, not intruding, just letting the moment be later. As the stars rose and the jungle quieted, Aya sat beside the fire, her voice soft, as she spoke in her own language stories of the Ayari, of floating gardens and crystal palaces, of cold hearts and proud minds, stories that no longer felt like home. The humans listened, some confused, some curious. John just nodded occasionally, adding his own tales, simple ones of growing up, of running barefoot through dirty streets, of losing friends to wars that made no sense. Aya laughed once, a quiet sound, but real. It surprised her how natural it felt, how easy it was to breathe among them. The humans gave her space, but also pulled her in slowly, gently, not with commands, but with small gestures, sharing food, asking questions, helping her learn their words. She began to repeat them awkwardly, but they smiled and encouraged her like family, like tribe. She had never known this feeling, not among her own kind, where perfection was demanded, where emotion was weakness, where help was rare. She looked around at these flawed, scarred, loud, warm people and felt something rise in her, a need to protect them, to stand with them as they had stood for her. She closed her eyes and reached deep into herself, unlocking parts of her mind she had kept sealed. The Ayari were mental beings capable of great power, but taught to restrain it, to hide it, to never use it for others. Aya broke that rule for the first time. She raised her hands toward the damaged trees around them, the scorched earth. The air shimmered, and light flowed from her palms, blue and bright, healing not just wounds, but life. The trees trembled, their roots shifting, leaves budding slowly, new growth blooming from ash. The humans gasped, stepping back in awe. John stared in silence, his face unreadable. I turned to him and spoke slowly, in his language still rough but clear. I help now, I protect now, like you protect me. John looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, a small smile touching his lips, not of pride, not of victory, but of understanding, of acceptance. The camp glowed softly under the healing light, and in that moment I felt something she had never known. Not from her people, not from her titles, not even from her family. She felt belonging, and it wrapped around her like the fire had once done, fierce and consuming. But this time it did not burn. This time it gave her strength, and for the first time in her life, Aya was not just a Yari. She was something more, something new, something human. And she knew she would never go back to who she was before, never again. Jungle had changed. The trees still carried the black scars of the fire, but green was returning slowly, steadily, as if life itself had decided to fight back. Just like her, Aya stood beside John now, not as a burden, not as a guest, but as one of them. Her wounds had healed, her spirit awakened, and her powers no longer hidden. The humans accepted her, not with applause or ceremony, but with simple gestures, a shared meal, a nod during patrol, a space beside the fire. Their trust was not loud, it was quiet, steady, built on action, not words. One morning, as the mist lifted from the ground and sunlight began piercing through the canopy, a distant sound broke the calm, a high pitch, echoing through the valley, not natural, not from any beast. Aya stiffened, her instincts flaring. John was already moving, hand raised, his team responding within seconds, forming a perimeter, eyes scanning, weapons ready. Aya closed her eyes, reaching out with her mind, touching the waves of thought beyond the trees, and what she felt made her blood turn cold. They were not animals, not human, and not friendly. They moved with purpose, precision, their minds cold like ice, and hungry not for food, but conquest. The cold ones, she whispered in name. The humans did not know, but would soon fear, a species that hunted not for survival, but for domination, intelligent, fast, and ruthless. They had seen Aya fall, they had seen her rescued, and now they had come not for her, but for what she represented: weakness, defiance, unity. They saw the bond she shared with the humans, and they wanted to crush it before it could spread. The ambush came swift and brutal, metal beasts rising from the mist, weapons blazing, energy bolts tearing through the underbrush. The humans responded like lightning, moving in sync, covering each other, returning fire. But they were outnumbered, surrounded. I stood in the middle of the chaos, power building in her hands. She could feel the pain, the fear, the determination around her. The humans were fighting not to win, but to protect her. She would not let them fall, not for her, not again. She lifted her hands, and the air bent, a wave of force rippled out, pushing the enemy back, disrupting their formation. John called to her, but she was already moving, her feet barely touching the ground, her mind reaching out, slamming into the cold minds of the attackers. She showed them fear, not her own, but the fear they had buried, memories of defeat, of pain, of vulnerability. She used their own minds against them, and some fell to their knees screaming, others charged blindly, firing wildly. A blast hit near her side, and the pain lit her nerves, but she stood firm. She was not the girl who crashed, she was not the frightened outsider, she was there. Shield now, her powers flared brighter, forming a dome around the humans. Absorbing incoming fire, John moved beside her, covering the blind spots. The others adjusted their positions, taking advantage of her protection, fighting smarter, tighter. One of the cold ones tried to flank her from behind, but a young soldier leapt in the way. Taking the hit with a shout, I turned her power on the attacker, bending its weapon away. Snapping it with a twist of thought, the creature fell and did not rise. The battle lasted only minutes, but it felt like hours. When it ended, the jungle was quiet again. Bodies lay among the leaves, smoke curled into the air, and the humans stood catching breath, checking wounds, mourning the injured, but alive, all of them. Alive. Aya sank to her knees, exhausted, but proud. John approached slowly, crouching beside her, his voice low and steady. You saved us. I looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. We saved each other. The team gathered silently, some staring at her with new eyes, no longer a guest, no longer an alien, but one of their own, not because of power, but because of heart. She had stood with them in fire and war, and they had stood with her in trust and belief. That night they lit no fire, the jungle too dangerous, the air too heavy with memory, but they sat close, sharing food, water, quiet stories. I felt the bond between them stronger than ever, forged not in words, but in blood and pain and choice. She looked up at the stars, wondering if her people were watching, if they knew what she had become, if they would understand, if they could ever understand. That strength was not silence or control, that love was not weakness, and unity was not shame. The humans did not ask her to be less, they did not fear her strength. They welcomed it, and because of that she had given more than she ever thought possible. She had become more than a Yari, more than human. She had become a bridge, a symbol, and tomorrow the galaxy would hear of it, whether it was ready or not. Next morning came with silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy stillness that wrapped around hearts and whispered of change. I sat alone near the edge of the clearing, her gaze lost in the mist that still clung to the leaves around her. The battle had passed, but its memory lingered in her muscles, in her mind, and in the eyes of those who had stood beside her. Her powers were nearly drained, her body aching, but her resolve clearer than ever. Above them the sky shifted, and from the clouds came the low hum of engines, several ships descending with slow precision. They bore the markings of her people, the Ayari, elegant silver forms gliding through the atmosphere. Without sound or smoke, they landed beyond the trees, forming a half circle around the human camp, as if placing it under judgment. I stood slowly, her legs steady, her breath calm. John and the other soldiers watched as figures stepped out, tall, graceful, glowing in pale blue light. Ayari elders, diplomats, warriors, not here to rescue, not here to thank, but to reclaim and to question. The leading elder, a woman whose face held the same proud angles as Aya, stepped forward, her voice smooth like cold water. Aya, daughter of the mind, child of the third moon, you are to return with us. Now Aya met her gaze without flinching. Why now, she asked, her voice steady. Even after the fire, even after the attack, no one came for me. Until today. The elder's face did not change. You were lost, the risk was too high. Now that you have survived, it is time to bring you home. Aya shook her head slowly. This is my home. Now her words fell like stones in a pond rippling through the clearing. The Ayari behind the elder whispered softly. The humans remained silent, their hands near weapons, not in threat, but in readiness. The elder stepped closer, her tone sharper. You have shared your mind with primitives. You have used forbidden powers in front of them. You have aligned yourself with creatures of instinct and war. This is not the way of the Ayari. Aya stepped forward, closing the space between them, her voice rising, not with anger, but with truth. You speak of instinct, but you left me to die. You speak of war, but they shielded me with their lives. You speak of the Ayari way, but you forget what that way has become, hollow, cold, afraid. The elder raised a hand. Enough, return now, or be cast out forever. I looked past her to the humans behind her, John watching silently, his expression unreadable. The team who had carried her, who had trusted her, who had let her become more than just a burden. She turned back to the elder and said, then cast me out. I will not leave them. The words struck like thunder, and for a moment nothing moved. The elder's face twitched only slightly, then she turned and walked away. The others followed, boarding their ships. Without another word, no attack, no anger, just silence. The Ayari ships lifted into the sky and vanished among the clouds. I stood breathing deeply, her heart pounding, not from fear but from freedom. John approached quietly, standing beside her. You sure about this? Aya nodded without hesitation. They abandoned me. These people saved me. I know where I belong now. That evening a transmission was sent from the camp, one that echoed across channels to every corner of the known galaxy. A broadcast showing Aya standing beside John, telling her story, not just the crash and the rescue, but the truth about the humans, their courage, their flaws, their pain, and their hope. She spoke of The fire, the ambush, the sacrifice, and the moment she saw them not as monsters, but as protectors. She told the galaxy that strength was not found in power alone, but in unity and compassion. In the courage to stand when others fall. The message spread faster than expected, watched by millions, debated, analyzed, feared by some, and praised by others. Some called her a traitor, others a hero, but none could ignore her. Her voice had become a spark, and that spark had reached dry leaves ready to burn. Aya returned to her place by the fire, her hands folded, her eyes watching the stars. John sat beside her, no words needed. She had made her choice, and so had he. Around them the jungle whispered of change, the trees swayed gently as if agreeing, and in that moment I felt no regret, only a quiet joy. She had not just survived, she had transformed, and through her perhaps others would too. The morning sky opened wide, like a new beginning, painted in soft orange and gold as Aya walked slowly through the dew-covered grass, her steps calm, her mind steady. The jungle that once tried to claim her life now felt like part of her blood, part of her journey, part of her truth. Birds called from high above, wind brushed her silver hair as she moved past the sleeping camp where humans rested peacefully after weeks of danger. They had earned this silence, this moment of peace. John was already awake, seated near the edge, sharpening a tool. With slow, methodical care he looked up as Aya approached, his eyes steady and warm. Without speaking he nodded, and she returned the gesture. Their bond no longer needed words. The battle was over, but the war for truth was just beginning. That day, a transport ship landed near the camp, different from the Ayari vessels. This one bore the neutral crest of the Galactic Council. Diplomats, scholars, media, and security personnel stepped out, filling the jungle clearing with tension and curiosity. They had come not to rescue, not to challenge, but to witness, to record the first formal recognition of a new alliance, an alliance that defied centuries of fear and stories told in whispers. The council representative, a tall insectoid creature named Vith, with layered eyes and a slow, thoughtful voice, stepped forward and greeted both Aya and John. We have reviewed the broadcast. We have heard the voices of those who survived the cold ones. We have seen the data and the footage, and we have questions. Aya stood tall, her suit repaired, her posture regal, but her eyes held fire and warmth. Ask what you must, but understand we did not plan this. We did not seek glory or defiance. We only survived, and in surviving, we discovered something. The representative nodded slowly, his antennae twitching. Explain what you discovered. Aya took a breath, then turned so all could see, her eyes sweeping across soldiers, Carnivorous council members, and watchers from the shadows. I discovered that monsters are not born. They are made by fear, by lies, by silence. I was told humans were beasts. I was told they would devour me, destroy me, treat me as less, and I believed it until they proved otherwise. Through pain and fire and sacrifice, when I was abandoned by my own, they carried me. When I was broken, they protected me, not for gain, not for advantage, but because they saw me not as a Yari, not as other, but as one of them. Her voice grew stronger, and I discovered that power is not control, not cold logic, not titles or perfection. Power is standing for those who cannot stand for themselves. It is bleeding and rising again. It is choosing mercy when vengeance is easier. It is sharing fire when the night is dark and long. And they did all that without ever asking for praise. Behind her, John and his team stood silent but proud. The representative tapped a device, and images appeared around them, holograms of Aya helping heal the forest, blocking blasts during the ambush, protecting wounded soldiers, and standing beside the humans as one of their own. This footage has caused debate. Many still fear your power, others question your loyalty to your own kind. What do you say to them? Aya stepped closer, her eyes burning with truth. I say I am loyal to truth, to justice, to life. I am loyal to those who live by honor, not by blood or race or planet. I am a Yari by birth, but I am human by choice, and I will not hide that choice. The council was quiet. The watchers behind their visors said nothing, but something shifted, a ripple in the currents of history. I turned to John, who gave her a rare smile. You did good, he said simply. She smiled back, not for praise, but for the journey that brought them here. Later that night, the humans lit a small fire again. For the first time since the attack, I sat among them, eating, laughing, listening, not as an outsider, but as one of the family. They joked about strange food, alien music, awkward words spoken wrong. They teased John about his serious face and Aya about her glowing hands, but always with warmth, always with respect. She watched the flames dance and thought of the girl who had fallen from the sky, frightened and alone. She was not that girl anymore. She had walked through fire, through betrayal, through the cold, and found something stronger than anything she had known. She had found belonging. A few days later, the council sent their decision. Aya was recognized as the first dual citizen of a Yari and human alliance, a title made for her, one that would open doors and close old wounds, and with it came responsibilities. She accepted them not as burden, but as promise, and when the day came for her to leave with John, and the others to speak on distant worlds, to change fearful minds, to plant seeds of trust in places ruled by hate, she did not hesitate. She looked once more at the jungle, the place where she had almost died, and where she had finally lived, and she whispered thank you, then turned away, ready for the next fire, ready to stand, not as a Yari, not as alien, but as Aya, the bridge between worlds, the voice of both mind and heart, the girl who was saved by those she once feared, and who in return helped save them all. And so the story that began in silence and fear ended in firelight, and hope, and a new beginning written not in stars, but in the hearts of those who dared to believe. The so-called monsters were never monsters at all, they were just misunderstood, and they were human, and they were hers years past, but the memory never faded. Across countless worlds her name was spoken with both awe and wonder. Some called her the spark, others the bridge, but to those who knew her best, she was just Aya, the girl who fell from the stars and chose to rise among the so-called beasts. She had traveled far with John and his team across frozen moons and burning deserts, speaking to those who had never met a human, sharing her truth not with anger, but with fire, a fire that came not from hatred, but from healing. She stood before councils and golden halls and unbroken streets, before rebels and rulers and outcasts. Her message always the same: fear does not protect it, only divides. Truth does not hide it, shines. The humans who once were shunned became respected. Their history of struggle no longer used as proof of savagery, but as testament to resilience. Their warmth, their rage, their sorrow and laughter, it all became part of the great story, the human story. And Aya was its witness, its warrior, its voice. She never returned to the Ayari capital, though they invited her many times. She had forgiven them, but her heart had taken root elsewhere, in the earth and smoke and sky of a people who bled loudly, loved fiercely, and stood for one another even when it hurt. In her final mission, Aya stood on the edge of a new world, one untouched by war, where children from different stars played beneath twin suns, where flags bore symbols of many, and not just one. John, older now, stood beside her, his face lined with time, but his eyes the same. They had built something together, not perfect, not easy, but real. And that was more than either had ever dreamed. She looked at him, and he nodded, no words needed. They had walked through fire and come out not clean but stronger. And that was enough. As the sun dipped behind the hills, and the first stars appeared above, Aya closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of peace. Not silence, not stillness, but peace. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to rest, not as a soldier, not as a symbol, but as a soul finally home. The end